Around 800 BC, a people called Etruscans settled in Etruria, the rolling hill country north of the Latin village on the Palatine. The Etruscans wrote in an alphabet borrowed from the Greeks. They spoke a language different from any other in the ancient world. Many historians believe they came from the kingdom of Lydia in Asia Minor. The Etruscans dug tunnels and built dams to drain their marshy fields. High on hilltops, they built a number of cities, each surrounded by a thick wall. The famous Cloaca Maxima was one of the earliest sewer systems for drainage and sewage removal. It is still functional today, although much of it has been replaced by cement. The Etruscans were Italy's first highly civilized people. They were known as people of the sea. As pirates, they were feared and envied throughout the Mediterranean. As traders, they were admired and respected. Etruscan farmers used mostly iron tools to grow barley, millet, wheat, grapes, and other fruits. They raised pigs, goats, sheep, ducks, chickens, and cattle. The farmers used cattle for food and to pull plows and wagons. Etruscan miners dug copper, lead, iron, and tin. Etruscan metal workers and sculptors turned these metals into weapons, utensils, and jewelry. Their gold work was unrivaled in the Mediterranean. Etruscan merchants exchanged both metals and finished goods for luxury items of gold, silver, and ivory from Syria, Greece, and the other eastern Mediterranean countries. The Etruscans had a strong army. The soldiers learned much about weapons and battle techniques from the Greeks. Their infantry formed a phalanx, much like the one used by the Greeks. However, the Etruscans had one weapon no one else had: their shoes. They wore heavy leather shoes that laced firmly around the ankle. This gave them better footing than their enemies on rough or hilly ground. The Etruscans enjoyed bright colors, riches, and a good time. They gambled with ivory dice or played games similar to chess and backgammon. They often watched or took part in such sports as wrestling, running, boxing, and horse racing. Most of all, the Etruscans loved music and dancing. Sounds from a double flute or a stringed lyre accompanied most of their activities. Much of their dancing was connected to religion. Dances were done to gain favor from the gods. Both men and women danced. Dancing was just one of the freedoms enjoyed by Etruscan women. Unlike Greeks or Latin women, Etruscan women took part in public celebrations. They could also own property. The Etruscans had a strong sense of social order, or the way groups of people are classed. At first, there were no great class differences among them. Only acrobats and enslaved people who were captives of war were thought inferior. Later, people were divided into three classes. The upper class consisted of wealthy landowners, nobles, and priests. The middle class had farmers, traders, and city workers. And the lower class was enslaved people. A few wealthy families owned most of the land. They also owned most of the enslaved people who tended the land and did other work. The rich lived in rectangular, one-story homes made of sun-dried brick on a frame of heavy timbers. A pitched roof covered with clay tiles extended beyond the house. Stone-lined drains led from each house into the main drains that ran along the pebble-paved streets. Most homes also had broad-walled courtyards open to the sky. During the day, the center room was often used for talking about business. At night, it was the scene of entertainment. The Etruscans had many gods, most of whom were modeled after those of the Greeks. At first, the Etruscans worshipped their gods outdoors on platforms of stone or earth. Later, they built temples of wood, mud brick, and clay on stone foundations. The temples had peaked, tiled roofs adorned with sculptures. The Etruscans believed humans were powerless before the gods. More than anything else, the Etruscans wanted to please their gods. First, however, they had to discover what their gods willed. They thought every natural phenomenon was an expression of divine will and contained a message which could be interpreted by soothsayers or people who can predict events. Soothsayers read certain omens or signs of what is to happen. One group of soothsayers read omens from the livers of sacrificed animals. Another group of soothsayers explained the will of the gods by studying the direction and sounds of thunder and lightning and the flights of birds. When an Etruscan noble died, a great banquet was held. At the banquet, their widespread passion for games was seen in their funeral contests. Two of the noble's slaves fought one another to death. The spirit of the slave who was killed went with the noble's spirit to the underworld. The dead were buried in tombs beneath the ground called catacombs. Much of what is known about Etruscan life comes from such tombs, whose inside walls were brightly painted with pictures of daily life. The tombs had chairs and beds. The bodies of the dead rested on the beds. The Etruscans believed that life after death lasted longer and was more important than life on earth. So they carved their tombs out of natural rock, which would last for a long time. They filled the tombs with works of art and treasures of gold, silver, bronze, and ivory. Because of this, the Etruscan tombs are known as tombs of gold. Over time, the Etruscan cities grew in size and power. The Etruscans became rich. By 600 BC, they dominated all of northern Italy, including the Latin village on the Palatine.